I moved into Maplewood Gardens on a Tuesday in late October, and I still remember thinking it was the kind of place where nothing interesting ever happened. 3 stories of beige stucco, a parking lot full of sensible sedans, a little courtyard with a fountain that only worked about half the time. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, my first solo apartment after years of roommates, subletting, and couch surfing through my mid-20s while I finished my master's degree and scraped together a real income. Unit 2B was 720 square feet of possibility, and I was so proud of it I practically floated up the stairs with my first box. My neighbor across the hall introduced herself within the hour. I heard my door click shut, and then, almost immediately, a knock. I opened it to find a woman in her mid-50s standing very close, closer than felt natural, with her arms crossed loosely and her head tilted at an angle that managed to seem both curious and disapproving at the same time. She had short blonde hair that was very precisely styled, pressed khaki slacks, and the kind of smile that never quite reached the eyes. "Karen Hollis," she said. "Unit 2A. I've been here 11 years. She said it the way someone might say I own this building, and I would come to understand, over the following months, that in her mind, she basically did. I told her my name. I told her I was excited to be there. I asked if she had any tips about the building, parking, laundry, that kind of thing. She gave me a short list of rules that I was fairly certain she had invented herself, including the information that the hallway was a quiet zone after 8 p.m., that packages left in front of doors were a trip hazard and an eyesore, and that she had an arrangement with a previous tenant of 2B in which neither of them played music on Sunday mornings. I nodded through all of it because I was new and I wanted peace, and because I genuinely could not tell if she was joking. She was not joking. For the first few weeks, I barely registered Karen as a problem. I was busy settling in, figuring out the commute to my new job, learning which burners on the stove ran hot. I saw her in the hallway occasionally. She watched me with that slightly pinched expression, the one that suggested I was perpetually on the verge of doing something wrong. I said good morning. She said something back that was technically good morning, but felt more like a warning. I assumed she was just one of those people, the kind you find in every apartment building, every office, every block, who polices common spaces like it's a full-time vocation. I figured I'd keep my head down, be a good neighbor, and she'd eventually lose interest in me. I had no idea what I was in for. The first real incident happened about 6 weeks after I moved in. It was a Friday night in December, and I had 3 friends over for dinner. Not a party, literally dinner. 4 people, a bottle of wine, pasta, and a lot of laughing. We wrapped up around 11, said our goodbyes in the hallway in what I thought were indoor voices, and that was that. Saturday morning I found a note slipped under my door. Handwritten, in blue ballpoint, on a piece of paper torn from a legal pad. The noise from your apartment last night was disruptive and inconsiderate. Please be aware that this is a residential building with shared walls. Future disturbances will be reported to management. I read it 3 times. I stared at it the way you stare at something that doesn't quite make sense, like a road sign in the wrong language. I hadn't played music. We'd been speaking at normal conversation volume. We'd left before midnight. I genuinely did not understand what rule I had broken. But I was new, and I was non-confrontational, and so I folded the note up and told myself I'd just be more careful. I was more careful. It didn't matter. Over the next 2 months, I received 7 more notes. Each one was written in the same blue ballpoint, on the same legal pad paper, in the same tidy and slightly threatening handwriting. I was told that my shower was too loud in the mornings, specifically that she could hear the pipes, which I had no control over, but apparently that was my fault. I was told that my doormat was too large and constituted an encroachment on shared space, despite the fact that it was barely 12 inches wide and sat flush against my door. I was told that the smell of whatever I was cooking, it was curry, was pungent and invasive. I was told, in one particularly bewildering note, that I had been seen loitering in the parking lot, when in reality I had been sitting on my own car talking on the phone with my mother. I started keeping the notes. I don't know exactly when I made the decision. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't strategic. It was just something I did instinctively, the way you save a receipt you think you might need later. I put them in a folder in my desk drawer. I wrote the date on each one in pencil. I told myself I probably wouldn't need them. I kept being wrong about things. Spring came, and with it a new development. Karen had apparently decided that notes were insufficient. She began going directly to the building manager. His name was Dale, and he was a mild, slightly harassed man in his early 60s who managed about a dozen properties and had the permanent look of someone who wished he were somewhere else. I know she started going to Dale because he began showing up at my door with the slightly apologetic expression of a man delivering bad news he doesn't personally believe. The first time, he told me there had been a noise complaint about my television. I told him my television was wall-mounted and I watched it at a volume my elderly aunt could probably sleep through. He nodded. He said he was just passing along the complaint. I asked him who had made it. He looked at the floor and said he wasn't at liberty to say, but we both knew perfectly well who it was. Over the following weeks, Dale knocked on my door to tell me there had been complaints about my television again, my vacuum cleaner, a package I had left in the hallway for approximately 40 minutes while I made a second trip to my car, my welcome mat again, and this one genuinely made me laugh out loud, alone in my apartment, after he left. The way I closed my door, which had apparently been described as aggressive. I closed my door like a normal person. I checked. I timed myself. I close it in approximately 1.2 seconds. It makes no unusual sound. I started closing it like I was defusing a bomb, just to be sure, and still the complaints came. What changed everything was a Saturday in early April. I had been at work all day. I work in nonprofit grant writing, long hours, often weekends, and I came home tired, carrying groceries, looking forward to a quiet evening. When I got to the second floor landing, I found my welcome mat was gone. Not moved. Gone. I stood in the hallway for a moment, genuinely confused, looking at the bare patch of floor in front of my door as if the mat might reappear if I looked at it long enough. Then I heard it, a small sound, a shifting, and I glanced at Karen's door just in time to see it close. Not all the way. It clicked shut a little too deliberately, the way a door closes when someone has been standing behind it and doesn't want you to know. I stood there for a long moment. Then I went inside, put my groceries down, sat at my kitchen table, and allowed myself to feel, for just a few minutes, genuinely furious. Not just annoyed, not just bewildered. Furious, because I had been nothing but polite. I had been quiet and considerate, and I had done nothing to this woman, nothing, and she had apparently gone into the hallway and physically taken my property. The next morning, Sunday, I went to Dale's office before noon. I told him my welcome mat had been removed from in front of my door. I told him I believed Karen had taken it. He looked uncomfortable and said he would look into it. I told him I would appreciate that. And then, and this was the moment I realized something had shifted in me, I opened my bag and put the folder of notes on his desk. He looked at it. He looked at me. These are every complaint she's made in writing, I said. 9 notes. I've also logged the dates and approximate times of the verbal complaints you've passed along to me. I want this on record. Dale picked up the folder and looked through it. His expression was hard to read, somewhere between impressed and deeply tired. He said he would make copies. I said I would appreciate that too. I walked home feeling like a different person than the one who had moved in 6 months ago. The mat reappeared in front of my door 2 days later. It was placed so precisely, so squarely, that it was almost funny, like someone was determined that it could not be described as incorrectly positioned. I didn't say anything. I just photographed it, noted the date, added it to my folder. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters. I was never trying to win. I wasn't plotting revenge, or counting down to some confrontation. What I was doing was far more boring and far more effective. I was documenting. Every note, every date, every visit from Dale, every incident, every strange development. I was building a record of what had been happening because I had started to understand that what Karen was engaged in wasn't just quirky neighbor behavior. It was a sustained, deliberate campaign, and campaigns leave evidence. I got that evidence in abundance. In May, I came home to find a note on the building's common bulletin board, not under my door, but on the bulletin board in the lobby where everyone could see it, that described a neighbor who routinely disregarded community standards and had repeatedly refused to engage in good faith conversation. It didn't name me, but it referenced the second floor, and the description was precise enough that anyone paying attention would have known exactly who it meant. I photographed it. I also photographed the timestamp on my phone, so the date was clear. In June, something happened that even I had not anticipated. I was in the laundry room on the ground floor, moving my clothes from the washer to the dryer, when Mrs. Petrov from 1C came in. She was a small, watchful woman in her 70s, Hungarian originally, who had lived in the building for almost as long as Karen. She nodded at me, started loading her own machine, and then, without looking up, said, "She did this to the girl before you, you know." I stopped. "I'm sorry." Mrs. Petrov kept loading. "The one in your apartment before you. Young woman. She moved out after 8 months. Said she couldn't take it anymore." A pause. "And the one before her. I've seen it 3 times now." I sat down on the bench by the folding table. 3 times, I repeated. "She decides she doesn't like someone, and she makes their life difficult until they leave." She finally looked at me. "You're the first one who hasn't looked like you're about to cry in the hallway." I thought about that for a long time afterward. I thought about those other women, because they were all women, Mrs. Petrov confirmed when I asked, who had lived in my apartment and eventually left, who had found the notes and the complaints and the missing doormats too exhausting and too demoralizing to fight. I felt a deep, quiet anger on their behalf, and I felt something sharpen in me, something that had been building for months without me fully acknowledging it. I was not leaving. I asked Mrs. Petrov if she would be willing to write down what she told me. Just a brief, factual account. Dates if she could remember them, names of the previous tenants if she knew them. She looked at me for a moment and then said, "Yes, I'll write it down." Over the following 2 weeks, I discovered that Mrs. Petrov was not the only one with a story to tell. Mr. Okonkwo, in 3A, had watched Karen follow a previous tenant to his car and berate him in the parking lot. The young couple in 2C, recently moved in themselves, had already received 2 notes and were considering looking for somewhere else. A woman who'd lived in the building 4 years ago and moved out under what I was now beginning to suspect were not entirely voluntary circumstances had found me through a neighborhood Facebook group and sent me a long, detailed message about her own experience. She still had notes. She photographed them and emailed them to me. I now had a folder, a real one, a thick one, with tabs that contained 9 original notes, 1 bulletin board posting, a log of verbal complaints passed through Dale, testimony from 3 current and former residents, and email documentation from a 4th. I went back to Dale's office, and this time I called ahead and asked for a formal meeting rather than just dropping by. He looked at the folder with the expression of a man who has realized the situation is considerably more serious than he had previously understood. I laid it out for him calmly. I told him that based on what I had documented, Karen had engaged in a pattern of targeted harassment against female tenants in this building, that at least 3 previous tenants appeared to have vacated as a direct result of this harassment, and that I had concerns about whether the building management's practice of forwarding her complaints without investigation constituted a failure of duty of care to other residents. I told him I was not there to make trouble. I was there because I wanted the behavior to stop, and I wanted to know what management intended to do about it. I watched Dale's pen stop moving. "I'm going to need to bring this to the property owners," he said. "I think that would be appropriate," I said. "I also want to flag that if this continues, I'll be exploring what options are available to me and to the other affected residents." I didn't use the word lawyer. I didn't need to. The shape of the sentence did the work. I went home and made myself a cup of tea and sat with my cat. I have a cat, a gray tabby named Hendrix, who had spent the entirety of this saga largely indifferent to human drama, and I felt, for the first time in months, something that approached peace. Not because anything had been resolved yet, but because I had done everything right. I had been patient, I had been precise, I had been thorough. Whatever happened next, I had told the truth, and I had the receipts to prove it. What happened next was this. Dale called me 2 weeks later to let me know that the property management company had reviewed the documentation, had spoken with Karen, and had issued her a formal warning. Any further complaints without documented evidence would result in a review of her tenancy. Furthermore, they were implementing a new complaint protocol requiring written, signed submissions from any tenant alleging a violation, meaning anonymous campaigns delivered through the building manager were no longer possible. He also told me, and I could hear in his voice that he was choosing his words carefully, that several other measures were being discussed that he couldn't yet share with me. I thanked him. I told him I appreciated how seriously management had taken the matter. I said I hoped we could all move forward constructively, all of which I genuinely meant. For about 3 weeks, Things were quieter than they had ever been since I moved in. No notes, no knocks from Dale. The hallway was, for perhaps the first time, an actually peaceful place. I started to think it was over. Then I ran into Karen at the mailboxes. It was a Wednesday evening, just after 6. I came down the stairs, and she was standing at the bank of metal mailboxes, sorting through envelopes. She heard me come down and turned, and for a moment we just looked at each other. She had the same posture she'd always had, upright, composed, slightly braced, but something in her face was different. Tighter. She knew what had happened. She knew I was the reason. I nodded at her. Evening, Karen. She didn't respond. She turned back to her mail. I collected mine, and as I was turning to go back upstairs, she said, very quietly and very precisely, "I've lived here 11 years. I stopped. I looked back at her. She was still facing the mailboxes. I thought about all of it. The notes, the complaints, the missing mat, Mrs. Petrov in the laundry room, the women before me who had packed their boxes and left. I thought about how tired I had been and how close I had come, in the worst months, to wondering if maybe it just wasn't worth it. I thought about the folder on my desk with its careful tabs and its color-coded log. I know, I said, and then I went upstairs. The move-out happened in August. I didn't know it was coming. I came home on a Friday to find a moving truck double-parked in front of the building and 2 men carrying boxes from the second-floor stairwell, and it took me a moment to register what I was seeing. Karen was directing the movers with her characteristic precision, pointing, adjusting, correcting. She had an aluminum clipboard. She did not look at me as I walked past. I found out later from Mrs. Petrov that Karen had given 30 days' notice in July. No one knew exactly why. Management hadn't said, and Karen herself had said nothing to anyone except, apparently, to mention that she was choosing to make a change. There were different theories among the longer-term residents. Mrs. Petrov thought the formal warning had humiliated her in a way she couldn't get past. Mr. Okonkwo thought she had simply realized the building was no longer terrain she controlled. The young couple in 2C just seemed relieved. I stood at my window and watched the truck pull away. I want to tell you I felt triumphant, because that's what you're supposed to feel in a moment like that. Vindicated, victorious, satisfied. And I did feel some of that. I felt the specific relief of tension you've carried so long you'd stopped noticing it, draining away all at once. I felt proud of myself for not leaving, for holding my ground, for building the case quietly and carefully and refusing to be worn down. But mostly what I felt was tired and a little sad and very glad it was over. The woman who moved into 2A in September is named Deja. She's a nurse, in her early 30s, and she brought a begonia in a yellow pot that she put in the hallway window on the landing, which she asked the building if it was okay, and they said yes. The first time we passed each other in the hall, she gave me a real smile, the uncomplicated kind, and said she was glad to meet me. I told her the laundry machines ran fast, the second-floor pipes were loud when the heat first kicked on in fall, and she shouldn't worry about the fountain in the courtyard because it worked about half the time, but they were getting it fixed. She laughed. I laughed. We stood there for a minute in the hallway, just talking about nothing in particular. It was, in the most ordinary and wonderful way, exactly what living somewhere is supposed to feel like. I still have the folder. It's still in my desk drawer, still tabbed, still organized. I don't think I'll ever need it again. But I'll keep it, because it reminds me of something I learned about myself in the strangest, most tedious, most unexpectedly formative year of my adult life. That patience isn't the same as passivity. That documentation is a form of power. That you don't have to be loud or dramatic or confrontational to hold your ground. You just have to be consistent and clear and willing to outlast someone who is betting you'll give up first. I didn't give up. I have a cat named Hendrix and a begonia neighbor and an apartment I love, and I close my door at whatever speed I feel like closing it. And honestly, that's enough. That's more than enough.